It's critical in times like these, and they don't come along very often, that change agents have got to have the support of the public. And in the modern world, with all the tools we have, it's never been easier to do that. One way you support is to come and listen. I really appreciate that you have. And so, if you would, a very loud round of applause to a very powerful man, Dr. Stephen Greer.
Thank you very much, Steve Bassett, and a round of applause for him for the enormous work. I know what it goes into. Now, y'all ready for this? I was at the Pentagon a couple years ago talking to an admiral over there about this who had been shut out of information that he thought he should have access to, and he should have. And he says, well, I just want the truth. And I went into my Jack Nicholson mode. You remember A Few Good Men when he turns to that really pissy lawyer, Tom Cruise, and says, you can't handle the truth. And love that. This issue is very complex. We only have a few minutes here. But in a nutshell, we have enough evidence way beyond what they had for Monica Gate to open up a serious inquiry into a subject which has been the butt of many jokes and ridicule for over 50 years. Many of the military witnesses that have come forward in the Disclosure Project are people who said they never wanted to come forward because of the fear of ridicule from the media and from the powers that be, aside from the fact that some of them have been threatened with being erased. Now, if you get the Disclosure book and tapes that we have out here, and by the way, we had a benefactor give us a huge donation so that we could basically give those out at cost, so they're very inexpensive. It's a 600-page book. It has the transcripts of 69 of these military and intelligence and corporate witnesses. If you don't have it, get one, get a case, and put it in your library and get the word out. We have the smoking guns. We have the documents. We have the first-hand corroborating testimony. There is physical evidence. It's all there. The problem is, and I had this conversation with a number of people in the Congress, the reason this thing is still secret isn't because it's silly. It's because it's so profound. The implications of the fact that, number one, that these UFOs are real, which anyone with an IQ over mud can figure out. But number two, that in fact, we not only have been in possession of materiel associated with these craft, but have figured out how they operate. If you go all the way back to the 1950s, early 50s, and look at the Walter, the memo from Canada. I don't know if you remember this, it's in the book, and it clearly states in this top secret memo that I understand got inadvertently declassified by the Canadian government. We have, at that time, in 1950, 51, 52, before we detonated the first hydrogen bomb, a project that was studying the, quote, modus operandi, the means of operating these so-called UFOs. And the project was so classified, Dr. Vannevar Bush and a team of his people were working on it, that it was restricted more than the development of the hydrogen bomb. And I'm quoting, paraphrasing from this document. This is an official document, undisputed. It's not one that has any question about its authenticity. Think about what that means. What it means is that since Eisenhower, there has not been an intact chain of command over this subject. And let me tell you how dangerous that is. You've got a kleptocracy. This is my ungenerous term for the folks controlling the secrecy on this issue. You have a kleptocracy that has arrogated to itself the right to not only know this information, but to withhold the technologies from the public, which, if they could be put into application for peaceful uses, would enable us to say adios to Saudi Arabian oil. It would enable us to completely end global warming, begin a new era in environmental sustainability, and would eliminate poverty within our lifetime, within 20 years. Totally eliminate poverty. I have used the term recently in a position paper. It's up on our website, disclosureproject.org, where I used the term planeticide, that things have gotten so bad that we're at the point now where, with malice aforethought and utter greed and stupidity, Information and technologies are being withheld from the public that are necessitating our cannibalization of Gaia, of Mother Earth. And this cannot continue. This has to end. So the Disclosure Project and a company that I put together called Space Energy Access Systems is working to get in the former, the information out to the public, and in the latter, to try to identify and bring out the technologies through a clean, non-black operation to the public. It isn't easy. Because we're doing this with $3.85, or thereabouts, and it's an enormous thing that we're taking on. Back in 1993, after I had started an organization called the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, we had successfully sent rapid response teams to Belgium, to Mexico, throughout the United States and other places, where we had made contact with these objects at fairly close range. The results of that were that the head of Army Intelligence and a few other spooks called me in and said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well, don't you think it's time that the people take this matter into their own hands since you've messed it up so badly?" And he looked at me. He says, "Who the hell are you?" I said, "Well," he says, "you have no right to be doing this." I said, "Of course I do. I'm a denizen of Earth. And besides, my mother's family were some of the original founders of the United States. And moreover, when she used to brag about that, my dad would say, well, hell, we were waiting for the damn Mayflower to get here because he's half Cherokee Indian." So he's passed on. God bless him. But the fact is, we do have a right to know this information, and we have a need to. And when I've been asked by all kinds of powerful people, why is this really being kept secret? I said, well, there's a whole constellation of issues. But it really has to do about power and how the world runs. It's power. Now, people think it's money. Money, look, I need money because I have 4 daughters and I got to put them through college and this sort of thing. That's money. Power is something else. All right, when you start talking about a multi-trillion-dollar segment of the world's economy that is a centralized oil and electric grid and fossil fuels, and that is the engine that runs the entire economy. And this information about these things you see pictures of flying around the sky, if the information that we know is extant is released to the public, it will very quickly find its way into technological applications, which will also mean goodbye ExxonMobil, goodbye public utilities, we won't need them. Now you applaud. But how many of you have 401ks invested in some of these companies? My point is, you're dealing with something that would totally change the way the world runs. Back in 1993, I was invited by Lawrence Rockefeller to come out to his ranch with some spooks and some other folks, my intelligence friends, I'd say that lovingly. And, I'm a country doctor in North Carolina at the time, rattling around in an ER, taking care of gunshots and shootings and heart attacks and all the fun stuff. And I get involved in this stuff, partially out of the fact that my uncle designed the lunar module, the thing that landed on the moon, took Neil Armstrong there. He was the senior project engineer at Grumman who designed that. And I thought, well, here we go. So I'm going to go out here and I'll meet with these guys and see, what's going on. And one night, Lawrence takes me out, and of course, they have the original of everything. So the original Remington that has the Native American with the headdress with his arms outstretched to the sky, it's beautiful, was there on his deck. And we went out there by ourselves. He says, well, Dr. Greer, you know that no aspect of life on Earth will be unaltered once this comes out. So profound are the implications. I said, I know, Lawrence, that's why it's so damn secret. And also so illegally secret. It couldn't be legal with the president and the Congress and the right people knowing about it and keep it secret. It has to be an unacknowledged special access project. Memorize it, USAP. That's what they're really called, if you ever hear it. And they are unacknowledged. They're not acknowledged to anyone unless you're in the project. And I told Mr. Rockefeller, I said, yeah, but you know what? This has been going on for decades. And now the world is beginning to stew in its own juices environmentally. And we're going to, the chickens, and this is 93, long before 2001 and the 9/11 event. And I said the chickens will come home to roost if we maintain this status quo where the zero-sum game of fossil fuels necessitates the impoverishment of at least 80% of the world's population. You think I'm kidding? CNN today reported China being industrialized, moving into the oil and commodities markets. If you think gas is expensive now, wait 5 or 10 years. You'll be lucky if you can buy it for $10 a gallon. It is a serious problem, and the only way to maintain the zero-sum game that we have of energy supplies is to keep this subject secret, make you people think that this is all hooey and nonsense, because the shills that are in the media who are on the payroll, like this, believe me, I know who they are, of these secret operations, will make this sound like so much nonsense when in reality they know it's true. In 2001, as you know, prior to the 9/11 event, we had a large press conference in Washington. That's available for free. Anyone who wants to see it, download it, take it, put it on your cable access station. We had 20 or 22 military and intelligence witnesses there, National Press Club ballroom, packed with every network in the world. By the way, it was viewed live by around 500,000 people. It was the largest webcast in the history of the Internet. Not the history of the National Press Club, of the Internet. That's how much interest there is, even though this subject doesn't matter, you see. But there's enormous interest. It ended up getting covered briefly by networks all over the world and then was taken down. The shills, the national security control levers were being pulled heavily. And a little tidbit, that first hour of that webcast that you can see in its entirety, because thank God we recorded it as well as broadcast it, was jammed externally by NSA. This I have on direct sources. So that's why the people who tried to get on, hundreds of thousands of people, saw nothing for the first hour, because it was jammed electronically. Anyway, this is the hottest subject there is. It is the crown jewel of the secret, shadowy government that Senator Inouye refers to in the Iran-Contra hearings when he says that, and when Eisenhower says, beware the military-industrial complex, he, a 5-star general, and conservative Republican 2-term president. It's because they knew that there was a kleptocracy of corporate and financial interests that had infected or invaded like a cancer our body politic, our institutions, our media, to keep things secret that would upset the apple cart of who really runs the show. And you got a couple hundred interlocking big corporations and individuals involved with those who run the show. It is not the President of the United States, and it most certainly is not the Congress. And anyone who tells you otherwise is in a fairy tale. Doesn't happen. I've met with some of these people who are in this group. About 40 or 45% of them want us to succeed. They do. But when Bill Colby was going to reach out to us, CI Director Colby was going to reach out to us to give us what we needed to succeed massively, they found him floating down the Potomac River the week that he was meeting with my board. True. I don't say that publicly often. I'll say it here. Times it's late in the game. Might as well put it out there. So it is difficult to overstate the significance of this and what has been done to keep it secret. I, a few years ago, was asked to brief President Clinton's first CIA director about this. The cover story was a dinner party at a townhouse in Arlington. And a guy who runs a think tank related to national security issues, who's good friends with the CIA director, said that this should happen. I said, well, what am I going to tell him? He says, and I have this in a letter. I can't release it because it's not my property, copyright laws, but I'll paraphrase what this good friend of the CIA director has told me. He says, the CIA director has made inquiries into this subject and knows he's being lied to and has received no information. This is a sitting director of Central Intelligence. And I laughed at first. I thought this had to be a ruse. It turned out he wasn't joking. This actually is the way it runs. And so I said, well, I'll come up there. So I got someone to cover my shift in the ER. My life is like this, crazy. And, I had 4 little kids, and we get a nanny, and so we go up, because I had to have my wife there, because the cover story is this 3 couples, you see. And I hate to say it, the wives were kind of props. Isn't that awful? Pigs. Haven't come as far as we think. Anyway, so anyway, my wife is the most saintly person in the world, actually, and we're having our 25th anniversary this year, and it's amazing. And she stuck with me through all this, and she's the only one on earth who knows what I've gone through. It's hard. This meeting was hard because I was asked to put together the information for a CI director. I mean, it's like, what? You know, I called this guy up. I said, you've got to be, can I say it? I said, you got to be fucking kidding. I said, you know, I'm a country doctor in North Carolina taking care of people in an ER. I said, you're asking me to come in with a satchel full of the evidence that we've collected? He says, yes, he's got to have it. And I said, well, what the hell is he going to do with it? He says, well, that's what we're going to talk about. Well, they ended up doing nothing. Because in this meeting, which lasted 3 hours, there's a lot of disinformation about that meeting. But the truth is, it went on for almost 3 hours. He was shaken to his core. He was extremely upset and angry. But I think what was the prevailing sense was that here you had the President of the United States, his inner circle, a sitting CIA director, and some other folks that I'd gotten access to through just networking. And they were all being shut out of the truth, and they knew it. And what I discovered is that your rank has nothing to do with whether or not you're going to know about this. You think that because you got 4 stars on your lapel that you're going to automatically know about this. Not true. Because I've met with people who are at that level. I've briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2. I've briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency extensively, 2 of them. And they will attempt to make inquiries into the chain of command. One of them, who I won't name here, went over to his shelf, you know, the big corner office that DIA head has at the Pentagon. And I had my military advisor and escort with me and a couple other folks. And he went over to his shelf and he took off a little ET doll, like you'd get at, you know, a 5 and dime store. He says, this is all I've gotten for my inquiry into the subject. True story. I went, mother of God, you got to be kidding. It's the head of the DIA. And what was interesting, because I said, well, sir, there are certainly people on your staff who know about this. But they don't want you to know. He says, well, I can't believe that. I said, I'm sure there are people on your senior staff. And there was a colonel sitting at the table, and his body language stiffened. And my military advisor, who's a former naval commander and very connected up in various circles, particularly unacknowledged circles, and I shared notes afterwards and said, that man is on the inside, and he's lying to the general. Look, it's the craziest game. What's up is down, and what's left is right. It's through the looking glass we go. And that is where I've been for, 14 years now. If I'm a little burned out, you'll understand why. Now, crispy critters. It's a terrible medical term for third-degree burns. But we are wild. The ER docs are just wild, wild, wild. What can I tell you? You have to be to do it. The fact is, a lot of the people who you would think should know don't, and it's because they're protecting them. Now you're saying, what? What? What do you mean? You don't think they've whacked people knowing 1% of what I know? They have. And I'll tell you why. I'm a nobody, so it's okay that I know. Say I'm of no consequence. I'm really nobody. So if you're nobody, you can do these things. But if you're the President of the United States, like Jack Kennedy or Eisenhower, and you find out about this and you don't stick to the party line, there are consequences. Take my word for it, and I'm not a big conspiracy buff, but I can prove some of this. Now, the problem is, what happens through this level of intimidation? It erodes the constitutional chain of command. And the Disclosure Project, what we're trying to do, is not only bring this to the huge numbers of people in the public, because our website's had, nearly 10 million people on it, but also to try to bring it out to our leadership. There's this myth that they think, well, you're on the Senate Intelligence Committee, you're your president, you're in the chain of command, and you're elected or you're appointed and what have you, and therefore, a priori, you're going to know. Because for them not to know would, of course, not only not redound to the success of democracy, it would erode operational chain of command control of critical issues, and it does. There have been some terrible things happen because certain people didn't know what was going on. It's very dangerous. But in truth, because they want to keep this secret until the appointed time when they deem it proper to pull it out, which will probably be about the time both polar caps melt and we flip upside down, or some such foolishness. Believe me, that time is closer than you might think. And the fact is, we have some folks who just cannot let this out because it would completely upset the apple cart of the geopolitical power structure. And believe me, we still live on a plantation, and there are a handful of masters and a bunch of slaves. Or as Tom Bearden said, they be the wolf and you be the rabbit. Love him. Now, changing that is a Promethean task. It hasn't been easy, and it still isn't easy. I was talking to Paula Harris earlier. I said, we need to write something called The Struggle. You know, it's been mind-blowing. It's been interesting. The only reason I'm still in this effort at all is that I'm certain of what the truth is, and I'm certain of the implications of it being tremendous. We have the ability to transform this planet from the current state of massive poverty, environmental decay, non-sustainability into a rose garden. We can do it. We can do it in our lifetime. We're going to have to pull together to do it. And we're going to have to say no, quite frankly, to those people. I don't know if these guys just weren't breastfed long enough or what, but who just cannot, you know, they're so greedy and they're so absolutely addicted to this level of power that it becomes almost a cult of power when you get into how these guys think and how they view this stuff. Now, the cogs in that big machine, and there are a lot of cogs, lower level folks, don't really know what's going on, and so they just go along with the game. You know, there are a lot of mid-level apparatchiks, you know, sort of functionaries. But the truth is, we have the ability in our time, right now, to change that status quo, but it's going to take all of us doing a lot more than we've been doing. We're going to really have to put our shoulder to the wheel and pull together and do it. Now, my view of this is, over the years, have evolved. After I met with Lord Hill Norton in Great Britain, who, can you hold this for a minute? Are you hot? Maybe I'm having a hot flash. Male menopause. But cooking up here. So, I'm glad I didn't wear a tie. I'm going to take this off. We'll have a strip show here soon. That's my night job. But I am a bodybuilder, bench 380, arm curl 160. It's fun. That way people sometimes will leave you alone. Not always. Doesn't always work. What was I talking about? Before I had my hot flash? Lord Hill Norton is a wonderful man who knows this stuff is real now, but when he was head of the Ministry of Defense, he didn't know anything. And of course, MOD head in England, as you know, is this also like DCI. They're also head of all the intelligence directors, MI5, MI6, MI99, whatever it is. But the problem is that just like here, if you are in those positions, you may or may not know what's going on. He didn't. And I was at his cottage. They call them cottages. This beautiful old house, this antiquity with a thatched roof, you know, in Hampshire, you know, in England. They're just beautiful. And I was there, and he was in an armchair, and I was in an armchair, and he said, well, why the hell wouldn't they have told me? He was mad. I mean, he was like 5'3" and these steely blue eyes, and he's a 5-star admiral and a sea lord. And I said, well, sir, I'll answer your question with a question. He looked at me. I said, what would you do if you found out there was a shadowy group that had established an extra constitution and illegal operation that was keeping from the public the means for us to evolve into a sustainable civilization, and that would literally save millions of lives worldwide, if not billions eventually, by it being applied for peaceful purposes. And in order to maintain their death grip on this, had actually engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors, murder, and a complete insubordination of the chain of command in every powerful industrialized country. He said, I wouldn't have stood for it for one bloody minute. I said, that's why they never told you. They know that. They do a psychological, even psychic sort of biopsy, and they will know whether you will go along with the secrecy. If you will, they'll give you little bits of it and bring you along and bring you along and bring you along. And if they think you won't, they're not going to tell you, because if they do, they know they're going to have to do something to silence you. So it protects good people from knowing, who are in high positions. Think about it. It's self-protective to everyone, except the planet and us. So psychologically, this is a very complex issue, but institutionally, it's even more complex, because people will think that, well, it's got to be this agency. It's the agency that has this. And there's no the agency. It's like a guy I was talking to about a senator who was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, kvetching about the fact that he had seen some stuff to make him think this stuff was really going on, but he had no information, and we made an inquiry. He was blown off. It was a sitting Senate Intelligence Committee member that I met with. And I mentioned this to a guy that I know who's a corporate guy who had been with Lockheed. And he says, oh, well, the tank those guys go into is the wrong tank. He'd have been better off on the 7th floor of the Xerox building over here in the suburbs of D.C. Anyway, so the fact of the matter is, this thing is wrapped up in a very unusual way, and it's how you keep it secret. Now, the myth in the media is that, well, they can't keep a secret. They couldn't even keep Bill Clinton's affair secret. Well, the fact is that it's all relative. You know about it. I know about it. There are millions of people who do. One of the biggest things that people want to see on the internet and in the media are issues related to this subject. I was on Larry King Live years ago when they did a show on this. His producer said it was the highest ratings they had ever had, ever. So you can't tell me, even from a money whore point of view of the media, they're all shills for either money or something, that there's not interest in this. There is if it's done well, and you keep it out of the silly season of, whatever. I think that the problem is that we have lost all of our major institutions on this subject, which includes the national security, infiltration, and corruption in the corporate world for the media, where the media has become the chief roadblock to the secrecy. It has. And I was meeting with the congressman last month, in February. What is this? It's April. And I was flying back with him from someplace, and we were sitting for a couple hours talking. And this congressman is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And he knows that I'm trying to identify new energy systems that are based on zero-point energy and electrogravitic and so-called anti-gravity systems to bring out to the public. We're not trying to rip off the black projects. We're trying to find scientists out here who understand this stuff or don't have a screw loose and can actually build something. We're still waiting. Right? We're getting close. We're going to see. And this guy was saying to me, he said, well, it's the media. The media is absolutely not free anyway. He knew this as a congressman. He says, the media spins everything. And you can see it happen on a political issue. You can see it happen on a technology issue. You can see it happen on this kind of issue. Years ago, I met with a man who was a national security, military affairs guy for the Washington Post. And he said to me, and we were having a drink at a place in D.C., some place that you'd never think we'd be, basically. And he turned to me and he said, well, I've got a whole file on some stuff like this, including the fact that there's been human cloning going on in covert military and corporate programs in facilities that are underground out west. I said, yeah, I know about those. I said, you know about the ones that make it look like they're ETs and they're not anyway? He says, oh, yeah. I said, well, why don't you run with that story? He says, Dr. Greer, you know nothing important is ever printed in the Washington Post. Now, by important, he didn't mean, who gave who a sexual favor in the Oval Office. I mean, that'll be front page for 390 days. Or, 10% cut on the Medicare thing or this thing or that, some trivial issue. Even a conventional war issue. You'll hear the conventional part. But they will not tell you about these issues. And if they try to, read the book, Into the Buzzsaw. Gore Vidal wrote the introduction to it, where he talks about journalists who came across incredible stories, and they were true, and they were just completely kicked out of their media organizations or worse. So the Fourth Estate is dead. Back in 1994 or 5, I was at a place in New York City with kind of the New York 100. You know, Laura Rockefeller was there, and Mrs. Boutros-Ghali, the wife of the Secretary General, was there, and Bob Schwartz was there. And Bob Schwartz is a media guy who had been on the board of Time Life, and he told me point blank. He says, "The media's become scribes sitting at the right hand of the king taking dictation, and we don't have a fourth estate. Not really. Not on anything this important." Because he had found documents, some that, I don't know if Bob and Ryan Wood are here, but some of the ones related to the so-called MJ-12 group and the covert groups dealing with this, and had handed it off to a major journalist that he's friends with at 60 Minutes at CBS. And they wouldn't let him run with the story. A lot of people said, you know, given the huge number of people who were following this Disclosure Project event in 2001, why didn't any of these other news magazines pick this up and run with it? I said, well, they tried to. I mean, one of the executive producers of ABC News was at my farm out here in Virginia, going through every file I have, and a lot of it's triple hot. I mean, I've had guys just flat out take things out of projects and give them to me, not declassified. And, you know, he was going to run with this stuff. And about a couple weeks after the May event in 2001, he called me and he says, well, you know, it doesn't look like we're going to get this on. I said, oh? I said, why not? He said, oh, well, they won't let me. I said, I thought you said you were totally in charge of Primetime Live in 2020, could put on whatever you wanted. He says, well, apparently not. So, look, the corruption is enormous. So it's up to us. Here, the beauty of the internet is that if you can keep your nose clean and stick with the facts, and if you look at what we put together with the Disclosure Project, on any particular section, there's not just one or two witnesses, there's usually 3 or 6 or 10 or 5, you know, corroborating the kind of things that were going on with, you know, UFOs being concerned about our nuclear weapons, or air traffic control, military chase them, or NORAD being involved when they deny that they are, et cetera and so on. But if you can keep your nose clean and put the facts out there, people want to know the truth. Now, I always tell people that they may not like what they hear initially. It's like Brian O'Leary used to say to me, the Apollo astronaut and really interesting guy, done a lot with New Energy. He said, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And I said, yeah, you're right. Sometimes that's true, but we have got to come out of childhood's arrest here. We're in an adolescent arrest as a civilization. We have got to evolve to the place where spiritually and socially we can live peacefully enough to let these technologies run our planet safely. Now, make no mistake about it. Can these technologies be weaponized? Yeah. You know, the #1 violent crime death I saw in the ER wasn't guns, it was knives. I saw more people sliced and diced and stabbed, even kids in high school. So, it's anything. I can turn this into a weapon. You know, I mean, you can weaponize anything. And this begs a larger question. Are we ready as a civilization to say no to the weaponization of all these technologies, which, by the way, has already happened, and put together an international resolve to live together peacefully so that the planet can move forward without killing it? Right now, we're in this death grip. It's sort of a catch-22. The technologies are being kept back for both greedy reasons and some legitimate ones related to weaponization. And the Earth is spinning out of control more and more into terrorism and anarchy and chaos and environmental collapse because the technologies are still secret. And it builds more and more poverty in war, more and more injustice. And if there's injustice and disparity, there will be violence eventually. And we're going to see more of it. So how do you break this? Well, you're going to have to get some wise people together. And several good friends of the Dalai Lama are on my advisory group, and we'd had very open discussions about what's going to be needed spiritually, institutionally, and otherwise to put together to bring these things out safely and create a world that we can leave to our children and our grandchildren that will actually be here and intact. We can do it. And we're, by the way, at V1. You know V1, you're going down the run. How many pilots are there here? You know, V1 is when you got to either shut it down or take off, because if you go much further, you're going to hit the end of the runway, before you can stop the jet. So our civilization's at V1. We got to rotate up, out. And if we don't, it will crash. The system will crash. We're straining the biosphere. We're straining the political structure. The asymmetric threat of terrorism will only get worse the longer we have to stay over in that part of the world trying to keep this line of supertankers supplying us with oil forever. All of that is going to have to change, and it should have changed back in the 50s. By the way, a lot of extraterrestrial activity that happened back then was, and people I've talked to, even very credible scientists and military people who knew about this, said they were trying to tell us to change course. They were trying to tell us, and we wouldn't do it. The Day the Earth Stood Still is actually a docudrama. Really is. I mean, it's cheesy. It's a 1951 or 2 or whatever. But go see it. It's a fantastic. And Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a docudrama. All the cases portrayed in there were essentially correct. So we have this opportunity as a people. And the question is, will we seize the day? Will we take this opportunity or let it slip? It isn't going to be done by anyone. I can't do it by myself. Don't think that George W. Bush is going to take on this by himself, or Cheney, or Clinton, or any of these figures. They're not. The masses are going to have to insist, and they're going to have to keep this thing on the radar scope. We had tens of thousands of letters go to Congress demanding that there be an open hearing on this and that the technologies be explored seriously back between June and September 9/11 of 2001. Of course, when 9/11 happened, this thing was building so much momentum that there was seriously being asked about and talked about. Even members of Congress and public talks were referring to the Disclosure Project because we put together all this stuff and delivered it to them. 9/11 sort of knocked a lot of things aside, but for whatever reason, I mean, you can build a conspiracy into that if you want. The fact is that it sort of put everything on a different burner and got shifted around. But the fact is, 9/11 and all this sort of terrorist stuff is going. Why is Osama bin Laden, who is, of course, a fanatic and a murderous maniac, I'm not going to defend him ever. However, he used to be an ally of ours in Afghanistan. We wanted him to help us get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. He became an implacable enemy after we went over in the first Gulf War and then camped out in these Islamic countries for another decade. And why are we there? Well, we're maintaining the peace. Well, nonsense. I mean, we're not in Central Africa. We weren't in Rwanda. We're not in Colombia in any significant way, South America. It's oil. 3 letters, O-I-L. Because without an uninterrupted supply of cheap oil, including the Iraqi oil fields, which is the second largest in the world, we're really in a big problem, particularly with China industrializing at 10, 12% a year growth of their economy. So we are having to do this. I mean, a friend of the Bush family told me in February of last year, very directly, he says, well, this really has to be about oil because the second largest oil field in the world cannot be tied up in the hands of this megalomaniacal, crazy dictator with sanctions, keeping it from being developed, when we need to get that oil to drive the economy and the engine of the world, including China and India and all these huge billion-plus populations that are wanting to live with lights and some air conditioning and whatever. And, you know, he said point blank, this has got, you know, it's just a reality. It's sad it's gone on this long. I said, yeah, but, you know, can't you see we're just digging ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper into this grave and throwing this dirt back on top of ourselves. He says, yeah, well, that's true, but you have to understand these are not people who think long term. And I think a lot of them have just made the decision that we're going to stay on this course until the whole thing collapses. So it is madness. It's worse than mutual assured destruction during the ICBM face-off with the Soviet Union. Because what we're doing now is that we're doing something that is going to endanger every nation on the planet, every people, because we are totally destroying the biosphere. And if you think that the problem with the environment and the air quality and the water and the death of the oceans is a problem now, visualize 1,200,000,000 Chinese and 1 billion plus Indians in India, the subcontinent of India, beginning to try to live like we are. It can't happen. It isn't going to happen. And this is what I'm telling you. We have a system that has been set up and artificially enforced for half a century that has hijacked the human future. We need to take it back. We need, as a people, to say, this has gone on long enough, and we are going to come together bring out the information, but also try to collectively identify the technologies and then move those out. Now, on that front, as some of you have followed what we're doing with SEAS, S-E-A-S, you can go to a website, seaspower.com, seaspower.com, and it's the corporate, it's sort of under construction, but it shows you what we're doing, trying to identify people who understand these technologies. And there are a number of people who do, but they're very, very frightened. One of the people we're working with offshore recently has been seriously threatened and is in hiding right now. So the technologies that would enable someone to run their house by extracting energy out of the fabric of space-time, the so-called zero-point or quantum vacuum flux field of energy, all of you know what this is? Or familiar, maybe? Well, get on our website, you read about it. Essentially, I mean, and the conservative estimate is that every cubic centimeter of space has enough potential energy in it to run the Earth for a day. Now, I think Tesla, and even all the way back to Faraday, stumbled into electromagnetic phenomena where they were getting excess energy out of the space around the machine. These devices have been ruthlessly gobbled up and kept secret. Now people say, what does this have to do with UFOs? I said, why do you think the UFOs are secret? If it was just about little gray or green or purple or chartreuse or whatever men, I don't think that'd be the issue now. Everyone accepts the fact there's the likelihood of intelligent life somewhere in the universe. I mean, even mainstream theologians at the Vatican I've met with, like Monsignor Balducci, say, I mean, come on. It would be a terrible thing if God invested all of his hopes for intelligent, conscious life on Earth. Paula was there, set that up, Paula Harris, and it was a wonderful interview. It's in the book, by the way, the disclosure book that's out there. But the truth is, those issues have some religious overtones and reasons, and there is secrecy around the sort of structure of religion. However, the big secrecy is dealing with power. It's always about power, always has been. And when you talk about something, a subject, that if it really opens up, will result in the entire world knowing that not only are we not alone in the universe, but that we already have in technology programs that are sequestered at facilities at Lockheed Skunk Works and Northrop and SAIC and E-Systems and EG&G. I can give you the whole list of the corporations up to their eyebrows in these technologies, MITRE. What you will find is that these technologies will completely change the way the world works. Because what happens when every village in Africa and India can have one of these energy generators without having to put in $1 trillion infrastructure of electric lines and power plants or pay for coal and oil to be shipped all the way around the world to run it? You will see a blossoming of the world economy and a blossoming of abundance on this planet like we have never seen in recorded history. But when that happens, the 600 million people of Europe and America will have their prowess, power prowess, the money issue, dwarfed by the peoples of India and Africa and South America and Asia. And what this means is, as REM says in their song, it's the end of the world as I know it, but I feel fine. Now, look. It will change things in a major way. This is not a trivial issue. There are massive changes that would attend the disclosure of this subject and the release of these technologies. It isn't secret because it's silly. It's secret because it has such huge ramifications. But if we stay in this death grip of secrecy we're in now, we're going to see a meltdown in our civilization, and we'll have to reboot it like a crashed computer. Now, unfortunately, I think there are some people in this group who have decided that that's the best course. And I disagree with them stringently because it's not compassionate, it's very short-sighted, and it's cruel. In the meanwhile, we have entire species of plants and animals becoming extinct every year because of the foolish way we're living on Earth. This can change. I hope you will join us. And I'm going to do a workshop where I go more in detail about these technologies and what we're doing this afternoon sometime. I get pushed somewhere into some room and there will be. I never know where I'm going until I show up. But I hope that you will find a way to support what we're doing with these efforts, because I think that the scientists we have, the military people we have, the other people, they're all there ready to help, but they need support from the masses. Don't think that this is going to be a top-down thing. Paul and I were talking about this. We completely agree. Yes, I'm happy to meet with a member of the Senate or a president or a Secretary General at the UN or whoever, and they're all very interested in this stuff, believe it or not. They don't laugh. They're very interested. But they are powerful people, and they know what side their bread is buttered on. And, you know, for them to take on this military, industrial, laboratory, corporate complex that's sitting on this is a tantamount to a political suicide. Not to mention the fact they'll be pilloried in the press as Governor Moonbeam or President Stardust, or, you know, so there'll be some appellation attached to them if they even showed they had an interest in this. So vicious are the shills in the media at keeping this thing secret through ridicule. So the masses are going to have to, almost like a fractal, it's sort of a non-local growth of knowledge, put this stuff out, get people interested, and get people behind these efforts. Now, not just me, but many people are involved with in getting the truth out to the public. We need your help. I'm glad you're here. Thank you, and God bless you.